بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. What does Islam say about men and women intermingling? Now this is an important question because as one of the great scholars from the last century, Sheikh Mustafa Sabri said, issues surrounding women and hijab and related questions are من أكبر ما تفترق به الحضارة الغربية عن حضارة الإسلام, is the biggest divide between Western culture and civilization and Islamic culture and civilization. And of course, as we know, in the last 100, 200 years, there has been a process of westernization where Western values are taking root within Islamic societies, and a lot of Islamic norms and principles and values are being eroded. And the Islamic value here that is relevant here is that of haya and iffah, shame and dignity and purity and chastity. And in order to preserve these values, which are important in Islam, certain measures are taken to prevent the opposite, namely fahishah and zina, namely obscenity and shamelessness and nudity and promiscuity and so on. But these same values are not considered values in the West, or are devalued or considered of less value. Hence, these measures that Islam has taken to prevent fahishah and zina and so on, they are undermined in Western culture. Right. So the Islamic terminology for men and women intermingling is ikhtilat, in short, or ikhtilatul rijali bin nisa, the mixing of men and women, or ijtima'ul rijali wan nisa, which means for men and women to be gathered in the same physical location in such a way that men are free to go where the women are and women are free to go where the men are. And of course, we're talking about where men and women are non-mahrams to each other. And this is something that is done unnecessarily, where a person is going into an environment unnecessarily where ikhtilat is happening, or they introduce ikhtilat unnecessarily within a place or a location or a venue that they have some control over. The Qur'an says regarding zina, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا إِنَّهُ كَانَ فَاحِشَةً وَسَاءَ سَبِيلًا. Don't even go near zina, fornication. Indeed, it is an obscenity and an evil path. Right? So the Quran doesn't just say don't do zina, it says don't even go near zina. And this is essentially the basis for why ikhtilat is forbidden. One of the major Shafi'i scholars from about 500 years ago, Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, rahimahullah, from Mecca, he said the reason why ikhtilat is forbidden is because it is madhinnatul fitna. It is a likely cause of fitna. It is a likely cause of az-zina wa muqaddimatuhu, things that lead up to zina. And he mentions a few examples, but primary amongst them is lustful glances, nazar. Right? Of course, ikhtilat could lead to other temptations and other wrong actions as well, but this is one of the major ones. This is one of the main ones, which is lustful glances. So that moves us on to this passage from the Quran where Allah tells us the believing males and the believing females both must lower their gazes, meaning avert their gazes. قل للمؤمنين يغضوا من أبصارهم ويحفظوا فروجهم, and وقل للمؤمنات يغضضن من أبصارهن ويحفظن فروجهن. Tell the believing males to lower their gazes and guard their private parts, and tell the believing females to lower their gazes and guard their private parts. Right? So lowering the gaze means, of course, to not look at the awrah of anyone, to not look at the awrah of anyone that one is not permitted to look at the awrah of. And often in a context of ikhtilat, because a lot of people may not practice Islamic guidance on dress, so the awrah may be exposed, like a woman's leg or hair or chest may be exposed. And in a context of ikhtilat, the men will, of course, it'll be next to impossible to avoid looking at those things. And of course, looking at those things is not permissible. And even if the awrah is covered, and of course, the women in a context where there are men present, they should also cover their face. They should be wearing the niqab. But if the face is uncovered and a man is looking at the face as well with shahwa, then this is also impermissible. Shahwa means with lust, with desire, with taladhud, taking pleasure, right? And what's the how do you determine that? One of the Hanafi scholars from about 500 years ago, Imam al-Quhustani rahimahullah, he explained that what's meant by shahwa in terms of looking is where ميل النفس إلى القرب منها أو منه أو المس لها أو له مع النظر, where a man is looking at a woman or a woman is looking at a man, and that causes some attraction whereby they want to come closer to them and they want to touch them, right? So this is a level of this is how shahwa is determined. And of course, this is something very, very difficult to avoid. If a man, for example, is looking at the face of a young woman or a non-elderly woman, and so of course this could happen in a context of ikhtilat, and is very likely to happen in a context of ikhtilat, where a man is looking with shahwa at a woman, or a woman is looking with shahwa at a man. Hence, this is a madhinnatul fitna or madhinnatul fasad. It's a likely place where fitna and fasad, meaning temptation and corruption, occurs. Hence why ikhtilat is forbidden. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, as found in a hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari, ما تركت بعدي فتنة أضر على الرجال من النساء. I have not left a trial after me more harmful for men than women. So we're going to quickly look at two examples from the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Salaf, namely attending the Masjid and Tawaf, where, of course, men and women were both in attendance, and how measures were taken to avoid ikhtilat. So in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was permission for women to come to the masjid and pray salah behind the men. So they're praying behind the men in the masjid, right? So that's not ikhtilat, because the men are at the front and the women are behind. But this permission, of course, was premised on certain conditions. And the scholars afterwards, when they saw that these conditions were not being met, in particular, the scholars of the Hanafi madhab, they categorically said that for non-elderly women, it is no longer permissible for women to attend the masjid, because they are not meeting the conditions that the Prophet ﷺ himself had stipulated, right? And amongst those conditions, or some hadiths indicate that the permission for women to go to the masjid in the time of the Prophet ﷺ was limited to the salahs of the night. because they didn't have street lighting, the night would ensure that the women are concealed by the darkness, and they would not be, their identities would not be identified as a result of that. As Aisha radiallahu anha said, that the women would attend Fajr in the early part when Fajr would be prayed, meaning at the start of Fajr time, and they would pray and nobody would recognize them because of the darkness. And one of these measures, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the male Sahaba would remain seated after the Salah was completed, and the women would leave immediately, right? So the women would leave straight after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said salam, and they would go, and the men would remain. And why is that? As Salama radiallahu anha said, as found in Sahih al-Bukhari, it's so that the men do not reach the women, meaning as they are leaving the masjid. And Imam al-Tahawi rahimahullah said, after mentioning or in the context of this hadith, he said the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam only allowed women to emerge to the masjids for prayers in the situation that they did not mix with the men, and not otherwise. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, as found in a hadith in Sahih Muslim, that the best rows for the men are the ones at the front, and the worst of them are the ones at the back. And the best rows for women are the ones at the back, and the worst are the ones at the front, right? Why is that? Because, of course, the women are at the back and the men are at the front. So the front rows for the women and the back rows for the men are the ones where they are closest to each other. So what this hadith is showing is that the disposition, the temperament of Islam is that men and women should be distant and separated from each other. And a hadith in Sunan Abi Dawood shows that either the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam or Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu assigned a door, a specific door of the masjid for women specifically, right? And the reason for that, again, is obvious. Why? It's to prevent men and women from mixing while they are entering. So measures were taken to prevent men and women from mixing when they were leaving the masjid, as we've seen, and measures were also taken to prevent men and women from mixing when they were entering the masjid as well. There's a hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari, so we're moving on to the action of Tawaf. A hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari mentions that one of the governors of Mecca once prevented the women from doing Tawaf at the same time as the men. And one of the major scholars of Mecca at that time, Ata ibn Abi Rabah, a student of the Sahaba, he objected to this, and he said that the wives of the Prophet ﷺ would do Tawaf with the men. And one of his students asked, how could that be? How could they mix? And Ata rahimahullah said, no, they wouldn't mix. Aisha radiallahu anha would do Tawaf screened from the men, as in she would be separated from the men. She and her cohort of women would be separated from the men, and they would also hold a screen to be concealed from the men. So this is even in the Tawaf. And Umar radiallahu anhu, as found in this narration, he forbade the men from doing Tawaf with the women, meaning that the men have their own separate part where they are doing Tawaf, and the women have their own separate part. And he forbade the men and any man from going to where the women are, right? Because that would amount to mixing, ikhtilat. And if he noticed any man doing that, he would reprimand them. And Imam Ashhab rahimahullah, who's a major scholar and authority for the Malikis, and he was from Egypt, and he was from the 2nd century of Hijrah, from the 100s, so a slightly later time, but still in the time of the Salaf. he mentioned, and he's sharing this observation, ألا ترى النساء في الطواف وفي الصلاة خلف الرجال, as in the tawaf and in salah, the women are separated from the men, right? They're not mixing, right? And of course, the things have changed drastically, and things have changed a lot since the time of the Salaf. And when things changed and mixing, ikhtilat became common in the mataf, where people would do tawaf, then some of the scholars raised issues with this, and they said this is a huge wrong that is happening, a major abomination that is taking place. So while this has happened, in the centuries after the generation of the Salaf, but this is not a basis for its validity. Rather, there were major scholars that objected to it, as in this is a failing of the people in practicing what is correct. And even on the road, the Prophet ﷺ said, ليس للنساء وسط الطريق, that when a woman comes out for her needs, then she should not walk in the middle of the path, rather she should walk to the side. Right? So why is that? The reason for that, of course, is so that she doesn't come into close proximity with the men. Imam al-Aini rahimahullah, so these are some of the statements of scholars belonging to different madhab. Imam al-Aini rahimahullah, of course, was a major famous Hanafi scholar of hadith and fiqh from Egypt, and he said مخالطة النساء الأجنبيات haram. Right, so mixing with strange non-mahram women is haram, meaning for men to mix with women is not permissible. And Imam al-Mawardi rahimahullah, a major Shafi'i scholar from 1,000 years ago, he said, المرأة منهية عن الاختلاط بالرجال مأمورة بلزوم المرأة بلزوم المنزل. A woman is forbidden from mixing with men and is ordered to remain in the home. Right, in order to remain in the home, meaning and not emerge, not come out of the house without sound, valid reason or need. And of course, as I mentioned, the reason for the prohibition of ikhtilat is because it's a madhinnatul fitna and fasad. It's a likely cause of temptation and corruption. And a major reason, a major part of that is because of the visibility of the men to the women and the women to the men, and that would lead to fitna. And if men and women are gathered in the same place in order to listen to a speaker, for example, Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah said it's necessary that there is a screen or a barrier, like a wall, between the men and the women, preventing them from seeing each other. Right? Because as I mentioned, the reason for the prohibition of ikhtilat is or one of the big parts of the reason for the prohibition of ikhtilat is that they're seeing each other. And if they're in the same location together, then and they are within view of each other, then that has the same consequences, the same repercussions, the same implications. Hence, it's necessary for there to be something that prevents them from seeing each other. In the Maliki madhab, the Risala of Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani is, of course, a very famous, well-known text from an early period. And the author, rahimahullah, he mentioned that a person, when they are invited to attend a walima, the wedding feast, then they should attend. But then he mentioned that there are reasons why they shouldn't attend. And one of those is if there's a munkarun bayyin that's taking place, meaning an obvious, evident evil, an obvious, evident abomination. And the commentators on the Risala, like Sheikh Ahmad Zarruq, Sheikh Ahmad Zarruq, rahimahullah, a major Maliki, famous Maliki scholar from the 800s of Hijrah from North Africa, they explained munkarun bayyin, like the standard example of munkarun bayyin, an evident, obvious evil or wrong that takes place in the walima as ijtima'un nisa'i wal rijal, is men and women being together in the same place and freely intermingling and mixing. And this was the standard example amongst other commentators of Ar-Risala as well. Shah Waliullah ad-Dihlawi rahimahullah, in his famous work Hujjatullah al-Baligha, where he explains the wisdom and the philosophy of Islamic rules and injunctions, he says, recognize that men looking at women causes them to fall in love with them and become obsessed with them. It has the same effect on women. It is frequently the cause of pursuing carnal desires from women against the upright guidance, such as pursuing someone married to another, or without getting married, or without considering suitability. What is observed of this reality frees us from what is written in the books. Given this, prudence dictates that this door is closed. And the measure of not mixing falls under the general Islamic guidance of hijab. And part, of course, and of course, the overarching principle of hijab is that women do not draw the attention of men to them, right? So, Allama Ibn Humam rahimahullah, a major Hanafi scholar from Egypt, he explained that where we deem it permissible for a woman to come out for her needs, it is only permissible with the condition that she is not adorned, and she changes her appearance so that it does not invite men to look at her and catch their attention. Right? So this is very important because often people think of hijab as a tick box that they just have to cover a certain area, and beyond that they can do whatever to draw attention to themselves and invite men to look at them. Right? But that's, of course, incorrect. The whole purpose of hijab is to draw attention away from them. Right? So when they are coming out, they must not draw attention to themselves by, for instance, applying fragrance, and another example is what's mentioned here by Imam al-Alusi rahimahullah. Imam al-Alusi rahimahullah was a well-known scholar from Baghdad, from Iraq, from 200 years ago, and he said, what most lavish women wear above their clothes and conceal themselves with when they leave their homes in our time, namely a cloak weaved from multicolored silk with gold and silver embroidery that catches the eye, is included in the adornment that is forbidden to be revealed. I believe that their husbands and others, allowing them to go out like that and walk among strange men, is due to their lack of ghairah. And this calamity has become common. So Imam al-Alusi was saying this, as I said, 200 years ago. And of course, this has become even more prevalent and even more common. And when something like this becomes even more, when it becomes so prevalent, common, it becomes a greater necessity to be conscious of it and to gain and raise awareness regarding it. Right? So we have seen from the Qur'an and from the Hadith and from the statements of the scholars that why ikhtilat is forbidden and how it is a measure the prohibition of ikhtilat is a measure to prevent fahishah and to prevent zina. And so, of course, ikhtilat has become very common and very normal, in the sense that it's been normalized, and even it has become, because of the pressure of values and norms that are contrary to Islam, to conform to those. Because of that pressure, people are even justifying it. Right. So because of that, it's important to resist that trend, and as far as possible, to one's ability, of course, where there is no need and there's no necessity, to remove ikhtilat completely from one's activities and one's lifestyle, and where it is necessary, where there is a need, like in the marketplace, or if one has to use public transport, for example, to try to minimize it to as far as one is able. And as mentioned, often people have a limited understanding of hijab, which sometimes even leads them to contravene and go against the very purpose of hijab. And this is a book that's recently been published on the topic of hijab, which explains the bigger meaning, the bigger picture of hijab. And it goes into detail from the Qur'an, from the hadith, and from fiqh. And it also has additional sections specifically regarding women attending the Masjid, and women and men mixing and freely mixing and intermingling, and other related issues. So if somebody wants to look further into the topic, they may consult this book. Okay, jazakumullah khairan. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.